What's up, everybody? Welcome to the Good Wolf Project. I'm your host, Jerry Scarlato. Today, I want to talk to you about stress. Since we don't have enough conversations about stress, and since there is zero information out there about managing stress and making sure that you're not getting over stress, I want to make sure that we cover that for you. Of course, I'm being sarcastic. Plenty of information out there about stress, but this is such an important topic, and that's why it's worth having this conversation regularly. I've done episodes before about stress. I've had experts on about stress, and that'll all happen again in the future. But because we need to be constantly reminded of the things that we need to focus on, we need to bring them up periodically. Plus, today I'm going to give you some very tactical tips that you can use to be able to manage your stress. Now, before we get into that, I want to make sure that you hit the pause button and go leave a review for the podcast. You can leave us up to a 5-star review on Google or Apple. Yes, on Google, Apple, Spotify, or any other podcast hosts that you are using. You can leave us a review. The reason that is important, and unless or until you're in the podcast world yourself, then it's hard to really appreciate this. But the reason that it is important is because those hosts pay attention to the reviews. When you get more reviews, then you reach more people. It's that simple. Now, you can also reach more people by your audience sharing the episode. That's another thing that you are welcome to do, and I will greatly appreciate doing that as well. But the more reviews we have, the more people that we reach. That means you are directly affecting our reach. You are directly affecting somebody else. So when you go review, that means that somebody else can potentially find this information and it have an impact on them. So you are leaving an impact on others by simply leaving up to a 5-star review. So I appreciate you doing that. Now, of course, don't go stressing about it. Keep calm. Everything's going to be okay. Stress is something that is a part of our life. I think that we have gotten to a point where we try to eliminate stress so much that we are stressed about trying to eliminate stress. We have convinced ourselves that it is only when we are without stress that we can be happy. That it's only when we don't have things pushing against us that we can be happy, that we can be content, that we can be fulfilled in life. And yet, it is the people, from my experience, with my hands-on experience with thousands of people that I've worked with, owning a fitness studio for 10 years, being in the health and fitness industry for over 15 years, the number of athletes that I worked with, being a strength conditioning coach at a number of different schools for a number of different sports and teams. The ones that try to eliminate stress from their lives are the ones that are more stressed because they look at it as a bad thing. They look at it as something that's not supposed to be there. And of course, the world tells you that it's not supposed to be there. The world tells you that stress is something that is going to kill you if you don't manage it, which is partly true, by the way, and we'll get to that in a second. But by convincing yourself that having a level of stress is a bad thing, you're also layering on more stress. You're becoming stressed about your stress. And that's counterproductive. So the first step in all of this is not layering on another layer for the sake of doing it, for the sake of feeling like it's a bad thing. Yes, you want to manage your psychological stress as much as possible. You don't want to go into a chronic stress state as much as possible. You'll understand all of that here in a second. And at the same time, it's going to happen. Acute stresses will happen. That's short-term stresses. Chronic stresses will happen. Those are long-term stresses. Those things will happen. The question is not if, the question is when. So, if you set your mindset that if something bad happens to me and I get stressed, then I'm a bad person, then you will be stressed about your stress. However, if you start to shift your mindset and say, if something bad happens to me or when something bad happens to me, then I will figure out how to manage it along the way. Then you won't be stressed about your stress. All you'll have to do is deal with the thing at hand, whatever is in front of you, whatever is pushing back against you and causing the stress in the first place. So that is a good place to even start in this whole conversation, is that don't stress about stress. Don't stack one problem on top of the other because of what society tells you is a bad thing. It's not a bad thing. Stress is the only way you grow, by the way. Stress is the only way you grow. There's no other way to grow but stress. Psychological stress, physical stress, short-term, long-term, all of it, no matter what, the only way to grow and get better is through stress. Exercise, for instance, is just a stressor. That's all it is. It's a physical stress, a stress to your muscles, a stress to your tendons, a stress to your nervous system, potentially a stress to your psychological development. It's just a stressor. So you go, you exercise, you stress your body, you rest, you recover, you grow. That's what happens. Short-term psychological stress is the same. Sometimes long-term stressors can also be potentials for growth. So stress is something that you need for growth. Stress is something that's necessary, not need. It is necessary for growth. It's something you have to have. So trying to move away from it is doing you zero good because it will be there. And it is the humans that move away that become more stressed, more unfulfilled, more dissatisfied. Because human beings are built, biologically made for progress, biologically made for it. And when we don't fulfill that need, we feel distressed. We feel dissatisfied. Human beings are built for it, so when we don't have it, we are just not content. So there are two basic kinds of stress: short-term stress, long-term stress. Short-term is acute stress, long-term is chronic stress. Short-term can be thought of as something that lasts maybe a couple of months at most. Long-term is anything longer than that, anything longer than about 2 to 3 months of stress, of putting pressure on you. The short-term stresses almost always, not always, but almost always bring some level of growth. For instance, if you have a project at work that you're working on and you know that it's due in 6 weeks and you have to ramp up your level of effort, you suddenly have to study a little more, you have to get your numbers together, you have to make more phone calls, all to be able to put this project together so that you can have a good presentation. You practice, you do all these things in that 6-week period of time. You've grown in that 6-week period of time. After that, you probably go back to your regular way of working, but you've grown nonetheless. You've become a different person in that process because you've pushed yourself a little bit. You've gained some traction. You've gained some new abilities or skills by having to go and put this thing together, to put this project together. I've already given the example of exercise. When you go work out, you break your body down. When your body breaks down and you rest and recover, it grows stronger. That's the way it works. Reading is another simple stressor. Now, of course, most of us read mostly or only things that support what we already believe. It's called confirmation bias. And so when we read those things, those aren't really stressors. They can be to some degree, because if you read something that it supports what you believe, but it's a different way of thinking about it, then it makes you think differently. But especially when you read something that does not support what you believe or is a completely new topic or idea to you, that's a stressor. It's a mental stressor. You have to think about it. You have to process it. You have to go through the process of figuring out what this means and if you believe it and if it makes sense. That's a stressor. It's a psychological stressor. So there's a whole range of short-term acute stress, and so much of that helps us grow. Again, it is necessary for us to have these things in our life in order for us to grow. It's necessary. It has to happen. Where we go wrong with acute stress is believing that we are close to chronic stress, meaning it's not unusual for someone to tell me, I don't want to overexercise because I don't want to overstress myself. Let me be clear. 99.99999% of human beings on this earth are not in any danger of overstressing themselves from too much exercise. I can guarantee you that. I know ultra marathoners, those are people who, an ultra marathon is something that is over a marathon distance, 26.2 miles. So that's 50 miles, 75 miles, 100 miles, 2 miles. I know people who train in that realm. CrossFitters, of course, we all know how nuts intense CrossFitters are. And so many different areas, how intensely they train. Now, they still have to build in some level of recovery, but most of those people still train 5 days a week, 1 to 2 hours at a time. And so many, like most of them, the vast majority, are not overtrained. So you don't convince yourself that you're going to be overstressing yourself because you're putting in these acute stresses into your life. Well, I don't want to overexert myself working out. No, you ain't close. You're not close. I don't say that as I'm not close. I'm not close to overexerting myself. And I train at some level 6 days a week, if not 7, at some level. Most days, at least 5 days a week, it's twice a day. At least 90 minutes of weight training with another 30 minutes of something outdoors. And I know I'm not close. So it's not a judgment. It's just not convincing yourself that you're close to something, overstressing yourself when it's not the case. So on the other end of that, of course, is chronic stress. This is where we can get into trouble when we get into chronic stressful states. Most of chronic stress is caused by our own doing, is caused by our own mental spirals, if you will. Now, of course, we all go through situations where chronic stress is, to an extent, inevitable. For instance, last year, I closed a business and got divorced all within a 3-month period of time. During that time, there's plenty of stress, plenty of things that were outside of my control, plenty of things that were unknown. And so I had a level of chronic stress. While that level of chronic stress is somewhat out of my control, there are things that I still can control. And those are the things that I tried to focus on, which we'll get to in a second. But my body was affected. My heart rate went up. My cardiovascular capacity went down. So many things were affected, and I could tell. But I did not let myself stress about my stress, which then just added more stress. Do you see that? So when I say that chronic stress is mostly our own doing, what I'm saying is, even if you're going through a circumstance like that, a divorce, closing a business, having to move across the country because you're changing jobs, getting fired from your job, even things like a cancer diagnosis or losing a loved one, things along those lines, which of course are never fun and very challenging. We add levels of stress because we either let it go too long, or we stress about our stress, or we just dig ourselves down into a spiral. All of which are things that we can control. Now, on the other end of that is also, if we don't have that kind of circumstance going on, if we aren't going through something, we can still have chronic stress because of our thinking, because of our mindset, because of how we perceive the world. For instance, if you don't enjoy your work, or if you just see work as a burden, And when you go to work and you get some pushback from your boss or things aren't going well and you get mentally stressed about it, that is you getting mentally stressed about something that everyone does. Everyone works at some level, whether they're a stay-at-home mom, whether they're a business owner, whether they're an accountant, no matter what, everyone works at some level, and you can decide to get stressed about it because it's happening, or you can decide not to. There are plenty of, for instance, stay-at-home moms that have everything lined up for them. Husband makes a good living. They don't have to worry about money at all, but yet they stress about everything because if the smallest thing goes wrong, they go, oh my gosh, my world's falling apart. And then there's plenty of stay-at-home moms that maybe they have to work part-time. Their husband does well enough, but can't, she's got to work part-time still to make a few extra bucks. But she's like, hey, this is the way life is, and I enjoy it. And I have my kids, and I'm happy with my kids, and I'm happy with my husband, I'm happy with my marriage. So whenever you take your own circumstances and you spin them in a way that makes you stressed, that's you. That's you. Now, that may mean you need to change your circumstances, which is a decision that you need to make. But at the same time, we build our world a certain way, and based on how we build it, will kind of dictate our level of stress and anxiety. So it's worth thinking about how you think about things, how you think about your work, your family, and those kinds of things, and figuring out how to start putting those things into perspective, because sometimes it's just putting them into perspective. It's just recognizing that, things didn't go my way. Yes, the kids are being a pain in the ass. Yes, my boss is a pain in the ass. Yes, the project didn't go as well as it, could have, or I wanted it to. And yet, here I am. Still upright, still alive. So, a lot of times chronic stress is our own doing. It is our inability to just put things in perspective and recognize that we are creating our outer world because of our inner world. We are creating this stressful outer world and all this chaos and these things that we feel like are going wrong because our inner world is stressed and chaotic. So understanding those two types of stress, acute stress and chronic stress, is important because on the acute side, you can recognize that those things are necessary for your growth. If you have something that you want to do, you're going to have to push through some short-term stressors. It's going to happen. If you want to lose weight, you're going to have to push through times where you're not losing weight and you're going to feel frustrated about it. But that's okay, because eventually you will start losing weight again. Figure it out, make a change, it'll start to happen again. So you have to recognize that that's happening. On the chronic stress side, we have to also recognize that it is our inner world that is making our outer world. We have to recognize that it is what's going on in our brain and how we're perceiving what's happening around us that is causing us to feel so stressed about it. Part of it is not getting stressed about your stress. Another part of it is making sure that you're not over emphasizing how hard things are, how tough things are. Because if you live, especially if you live in America, if you live in a westernized country at all, if you live in most parts of the world, you're probably doing fine. And that's not to say that you don't have hardships to overcome. I don't know you from anybody else. That's not to say that you don't have things that you're going through. Everybody's on fire. That's not the question. The question is, how well do you regulate your fire? That's the question. So let's talk about some very tactical things that we can do about especially regulating chronic stress, because that's the thing that really is getting people today is chronic levels of stress. It started, of course, chronic stress has been a thing for a long time, but today's chronic stress started during COVID, and it is still carried forward to today. It is still carried forward to today because it's like we didn't let go of the fact that, hey, everything's okay. We just layered more crap on top of it. We figured out different ways to get pissed at people. So let's figure out how we can start to unwind our chronic stress so that we can live more contently. We can actually go after the things we want to go after without feeling like the world's going to explode. Very tactical things I want to talk about, meaning things that you can go and you can implement now, that you can go and you can implement today. These are things that I specifically did when I was going through the divorce and closing a business all within a 3-month period of time. Both of those things were in my life for 10 years. For 10 years, I was married and had the business, both of them gone in a matter of 3 months last year. Full disclosure, closing the business was my choice and getting divorced was my choice. Full disclosure. That does not mean it was easy. That does not mean that I just shrug it off and everything's okay. Anybody who tells you that getting divorced is easy, even though things aren't, you don't believe you're meant to be together, they're lying to your fucking face. So it's still not easy. So these are things that I did going through that helped me mitigate, not get rid of, but mitigate the level of stress. And that's the point. The point is not to get rid of it because it's going to show up. The point is to mitigate it and then move through it. Mitigate it and then move through it. Okay, so one of the most basic things that you can do, number one, is focus on the things you can control. Because in a stressful state, most stress comes from the feeling of either unknown or the feeling of being out of control. I don't have control of what's going on. If you have to move across country because you're changing jobs, you don't know how things are going to go. So you feel like you don't have control of things. If you're closing a business, I don't know what's going to happen while this is going on. If you get diagnosed with cancer, it feels like it's out of your control. All of a sudden, my life is in this cancer's hands, not in my own hands. And potentially the healthcare system's hands, which, sometimes you're lucky, sometimes you're not. Nonetheless, so chronic stress really derives from a feeling of not having control. So in those moments, in that time, while you're going through a situation of some sort, figure out or pay attention to the things that you can control. Those things there's 4 things you can control: what you do, say, think, and feel. Do, say, think, feel. Got it? You can control those 4 things. So everything outside of that, not that you don't pay attention to it, not that you completely ignore it, because that's going to be impossible, but everything outside of that, you don't worry about controlling. You worry about what you do, say, think, and feel, and how that influences everything outside of that. Thoughts and feelings are especially challenging during chronic times. I can tell you, again, going through the experience that I went through last year, the thoughts and feelings that would come up, the worry, the concern, the questioning, the this, the that, the other thing, all the things that would just pop into my head on a regular basis. It's things sometimes you can't control them at first. You can't control that it pops up to your head and that it comes into your mind. What you control is what happens next. What you control is what happens after it pops into your head. That's where the thoughts and the feelings, where you can start to take them apart from your actions, where you start to take them apart from what may turn into a spiral. If you have a thought about what's going on, oh, I feel like I don't have control of this situation. Oh, this really sucks. Oh, my life is terrible. Oh, my blah, 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 blah. And you start to go down this spiral. That's just a sequence of events that happens. You had the first thought, but then you had the second thought, and then you had the third thought. The first thought was not your decision. Oh, I feel like I don't have control of this. The second thought was your choice. So the goal is to stop from the first thought to the second thought, or create a gap, I'll say, from the first thought to the second thought. Oh, I don't have control of this. Gap. That way you don't start to go down the spiral. You don't start to dive deep into feeling bad about it. So the more of a gap you can create there, the more likely you can have a better outcome. You can choose a different path, a different direction. Oh, I feel bad because I don't feel like I have control of this. Space. Okay, do I really not have control of this? Well, this part I can't control, and yes, that sucks. But I do feel like there's something over here that I can do about it. I do feel like there's something in this space that I can do about it. And that's the point. When I say you can control what you do, say, think, and feel, what I mean by think and feel is that you can control what happens after you have these automatic thoughts or feelings. So that's the goal. Number one, focus on what you can control. Even within your actions, focus on the things you can control. If you're getting fired from your job, most people focus on being fired from the job. Oh, this is terrible because I'm getting fired. Yeah, sure, it's not fun. But what can you control? What can you do or say to get yourself moving again? Well, you can start looking for another job. Or this may be an opportunity for you to try something you've wanted to try for a long time. Opening a business, going and volunteering, doing something like that. So that's the magic of focusing on what you can control. That's number one. Number two supports number one. Number two is when you're going through chronic stress situations, go for two. This is very precise, by the way. Go for two at least 30-minute walks a day. 2 walks, 30 minutes at least, 30 minutes long per day. This is important because those walks are used for your thinking time. So all those automatic thoughts and feelings and this, that, and the other thing that pop up whenever you're going through stressful situations, what a lot of people will do is bury them. That's what I used to do, and it got me in lots of trouble. But just bury it. Well, I'm just not going to pay attention to it. I'll just suck it up. I'll just get through it. Whatever. Just bury it. While you shouldn't dive into those things every time they pop up, because when you're going through a divorce, you're going through some other situation, they're going to pop up regularly. So if you dive into them every time, your day is going to be shot. Your life will be shot at that point, because all you're doing is going to be worried and thinking and frustrated and so on. So instead, when you have those thoughts and feelings, recognize them, acknowledge them, but then plug them away for your 2 walks. And during those 2 walks, then you can think about those things. You can think about, is this the right path to go down? Is this the right decision? Should I take this job or not? You can think about those on your walks. And that is productive for a number of reasons. Number one is, again, you're not diving into those things every time the thought pops into your head. So you're saving time, you're setting aside time to think about them. Number two, when you're walking, you're outside, you're moving, especially that kind of cyclical movement, walking, what walking is, that kind of movement is very relaxing to your body and to your brain, and allows you to actually think things through. That's why whenever you go for a walk, sometimes you just randomly have a good idea, or sometimes you clarify something you've been thinking about. So when you're going through a stressful situation, if you have 2 walks built into your day, you know that those 2 walks are going to come up. You know you can think during that time, and then you'll be able to have a clearer frame to be able to think, instead of thinking when you're so worried about what's going on. So that's the second part. And like I said, that supports the first one. If you're focusing on what you can control and you have those thoughts and feelings pop up, you can take those thoughts and feelings and plug them into your walks, plug them into your day. And then the last one, like I said, the last thing that a lot of people get wrong is they stay in the fire too long. They feel the need to hang on to what's going on. For instance, if while I was going through the divorce, or when the divorce was over, if I felt like I needed to feel bad about that for however long, and I just focused on feeling bad about it, I could very easily be upset about it for years, or at least, 1 year, 12 months. And a lot of people do that. They let themselves get just eaten up by these situations and focus so much on just being, because we live in a society where people will pat you on the back because you feel bad about things. Oh, how you feel about things? I'm feeling okay. Oh, it's going to be okay. No, fuck that. Work through it. Work through the situation. Seneca, the Stoic philosopher, once said, "Let your tears flow, but let them also cease." So while things are you're going through a situation, through a divorce, through getting fired, whatever, fine. Give yourself a period of time to feel whatever you want to feel about it, but then work through it. Work through it. And then work away from it. And you can start to do that by starting to figure out your plans for the future. You don't do that immediately. You don't do that day one necessarily. But after a course of a couple weeks or a couple months, if that's what you want, start to plan for what the future looks like. Okay? I'm starting to feel a little more comfortable about this. I'm having less anxiety attacks. I'm having less thoughts and feelings about it. So let me start to think about what I'm going to be getting into next. Let me start to think about what the next 6 months looks like, what the next year looks like. It doesn't have to be a 5-year future, like way down the road, just the next year. What's the next year look like? So then you start to pull yourself forward again instead of constantly pulling yourself back, thinking about what happened, feeling bad about what happened. And that's what you're doing. You're constantly pulling yourself into the past anytime you're focusing on the thing that happened. This thing happened to me. I feel bad about it. Or when someone supports you feeling bad about it. It's been 6 months since, you've lost your job. How you feeling about it? How you feeling about it? Oh, you still feeling bad about your job? Yeah, I'm feeling bad about it. Oh, poor you. You're moving backwards immediately as soon as that happens. So figure out your plans, or start to think about your plans for the future so that you can move forward. Forward. That's the goal. Move forward. Again, it doesn't have to be immediately, not day one. Take the time, some time, to recognize what's happening, work through it, and then figure out how you start to move forward. For some people, that could be weeks. For some people, it could be just a couple of months. But don't stretch it out for the sake of stretching it out. Don't stretch it out because people are still giving you attention because you feel bad about it. Your life is being on hold at that point. Not only on hold, you're moving backwards. So challenge yourself to move through it. To move through it and then away from it. This kind of stress is very real. And everyone on earth will go through some level of chronic stress situation in their life. At least one. Everybody on earth. If you don't, I kind of feel bad for you. And I don't mean that in everyone needs to have bad things happen to them. But you figure out what life is really worth, what life is really about when you go through things that are stressful and challenging. You start to really figure out and appreciate what life is about when you go through those things, only if you go through them, work through them, and then work away from them. Not if you let them define you. If you let them define you, you'll just be stuck and you'll just stay there. But if you go through them, work through them, and then move away from them, then you start to figure out what life is about. And that's what we're here for, because we don't have that much time and we want to make the most of it. So go out there, focus on what you can control, get those walks in. Even if you're not going through a chronic situation, those are things that you should be doing anyway, to be totally honest. These are things that you should be doing anyway. But these are things you should especially be doing when you're going through some sort of chronic stress event. So Remember that you have support around you. You have people around you that care about you. And no matter who you are, no matter what situation you're in, no matter how you're feeling about it, it does not matter. You can get through it. You can get better. You can work through it. You just have to start believing in yourself. I believe that you can do it. I know that you can do it. You just have to start believing in yourself. Thank you so much for joining me today. Make sure that you hit that review like we talked about so someone else can get this message as well. And until next time, go out there and step into growth.